First of all, thank you all so much for taking the time today. I'm really excited to be here with Joss Warren, who's Executive Director and Head of Strategy and Partnerships at Thread. We're going to have a discussion today about decentralized trials. I'm going to rely a lot on Joss to help demystify the concept, what it is, what it isn't. Before we get into the Q&A with Joss, I'm just going to give a little bit of a quick overview of my perspective on decentralized trials and also genomics and personalized medicine and how these two fit together. We're going to have a lot of discussion about that today. Josh, maybe before I jump into that too much, would love if you could just give a quick personal intro to yourself and to Thread to kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me, and great to be on the phone with all of you today. So as Patrick mentioned, I'm Joss, and I head up strategy and partnerships at Thread. Thread is a technology company providing decentralized clinical trial solutions to life sciences, so predominantly pharma, CRO, biotech. What that means is how our technology platform helps facilitate the collection of data in a clinical trial in a location outside of the primary research center, so in a decentralized manner. I've been with Thread for about a year, and before that, I spent about 10 years working at a large CRO, predominantly in real-world data, real-world evidence, and late-phase research. So delighted to be here, and turn it back over to you, Patrick.
Awesome, thank you. Great. So just in terms of a quick agenda, I'm going to give a little introduction. As I said, we're going to spend most of the time on discussion and Q&A, and we'll just leave a few minutes at the end. So, and the Q&A, you will see if you're on tablet or desktop, towards the bottom of your screen, a little bar. If you see the Q&A there, feel free to put anything in the chat at any point. You don't have to wait until the end while it's on your mind. Just go ahead and put it in there, and we'll make sure we can cover everybody's questions at the right time throughout the discussion. So I'm going to give a very high level overview of decentralized trials. And as I said, I'm going to lean on Joss here to give a little bit deeper color, but I think this overview from a McKinsey report not too long ago is a really helpful, if kind of basic overview of the spectrum from, on the right-hand side, fully centralized trials, which are conducted completely at a research site, academic medical center, hospital, whatever it may be, versus on the left side, all trial procedures conducted virtually, completely at home. Think digital devices, wearables, at-home testing. And we'll get into this in a moment, but the reality is today that the vast majority of trials actually fall somewhere in the middle. There's relatively few examples of fully decentralized trials, although there are increasingly many. And most fully centralized trials are also starting to understand how they can simplify things by incorporating at-home screening or other kinds of approaches. So we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail in a moment. But before I go there, I just want to give a little bit of a background on personalized medicine and how these two fit together, because they do in a really profound way, in my opinion. So put pretty simply, personalized medicine is just simply using data to better tailor treatments to patients. And this, all these figures come from a report from the Personalized Medicine Coalition. But if you look at the one on the left-hand side of the screen here, it gives some examples of classes of drugs or diseases where the drug is ineffective on average. So if you've given a cancer drug to the average patient, 3/4 of people, it actually fails to be effective. In Alzheimer's, it's 70%. And one of the insights and hypotheses here is that actually within these groups, there's subsets of patients that could be better characterized and pulled out, where either a different treatment or the same treatment in a different dose might be more effective. And you can see that general concept on the right here. And over time, really, personalized medicine is simply this relentless march towards better therapies for patients using data to more effectively tailor treatments. And one of the amazing things that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is this trend really coming into fruition. And the Human Genome Project finished in the early 2000s. There was a lot of promise. We can see on the left here, in the year 2000, about 1 in 5 cancer trials cancer trials used a biomarker. And today it's 3 out of 5 trials that have a genetic biomarker. So this has been a very clear trend in cancer. We can see this now in almost every other major disease category as well. And as you can see in the graph on the right, every 4 years, we can see a dramatic increase in the number of personalized medicines that are approved by the FDA and are on the market. So what does this mean for trials? So there's a big positive to personalization, which means ultimately better medicines for patients, but this has placed increasing strain on the clinical trials ecosystem and landscape. So I've put a couple examples there on the right of, or on the left, of diseases where genetic biomarkers are now being involved in dozens of trials. So ApoE4 Alzheimer's, this is about 10 to 15% of Alzheimer's patients, 2 or 3% of the general population that carry the double homozygote risk factor. So there are trials being targeted at patients that carry these specific genetic risk factors, but the impact of this, well, the treatment is far more likely to be effective for patients. It results in huge screen failure rates at the trial. So this means that not only do patients have to meet a very specific criteria around amyloid status in the brain or MMSE score, but they then also have to meet a specific genetic criteria, which we know is only positive in 10% of patients. So we're seeing this across the board, that while personalization is likely to lead to much better therapies, it's creating a lot of challenges in enrollment specifically. And there's a real opportunity for personalized medicine meets DCT, decentralized trials here, because each of these diseases on the left are actually common, and there's plenty of patients out there that meet these criteria. They're just more dispersed than the traditional fully centralized trial caters for. So one of the big focuses that we have obviously is at-home saliva-based genetic testing, which is a component of the decentralized trial landscape. So saliva-based, non-invasive, it's convenient. It allows all the screening to happen at home. We use an approach called Exome Plus, which enables us to do quite a few different types of inclusion/exclusion criteria with a single test. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I really want to dig into DCT with Joss here. So I'll just come back to this figure for everyone who's not a pro in this. And Joss, I'd love to maybe just turn it over to you in a moment. Before we get there, I'm going to invite everybody to add any questions that they have through the chat. There's a couple of core topics that we're planning to cover in really a kind of fireside chat kind of format, where I pick Joss's brain and get his thoughts on these. So the first one that I'm going to ask kind of after my spiel here finishes is really Joss to go through the core elements of a decentralized trial. Beyond that cartoon overview I showed, really what is it and why do people choose to opt for more decentralized methods over centralized? We're going to talk about what typical trials look like today, impacts of COVID. We're going to spend a lot of time actually on some of the recruitment opportunities for decentralized trials, in particular include increasing inclusiveness and diversity in trials. And then finally, we're going to talk about personalized medicines and what Joss is seeing here. And as we're going to go, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So put any questions that you have in, and we'll make sure to get to those. So I'm going to stop sharing screen now. And Joss, I'd love it if you could just maybe talk us through the core elements of a DCT and what it looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, sure, Patrick. I mean, I think you did you gave a good overview, and we actually use that graphic in some of our training as well. The whole idea behind DCT is you're trying to change the location of where data is being captured. In a traditional model or fully centralized model, as you talked about, data is being collected through a patient interaction with a research physician at a specific site location. The whole idea behind decentralization is how can you make things more convenient for a patient? How can you change that location of data collection? And in many cases, you're using technology to facilitate that interaction. So for Thread, when we talk about being a tech company that provides a platform for decentralized trials, what that means is we're creating an omni-channel experience for patients who become trial participants to be a part of a study, and for that experience to look a lot like their regular life. So instead of them having to have these big disruptions in their day to go to a research site and kind of all the challenges logistically that go into making that happen, they're interacting in a study and contributing data through their phone or through a web-based portal. And it's not just the patient, but our platform would facilitate any stakeholder experience, whether it be the researcher or if you've got a home healthcare provider, a physician. All of those are interacting together on this study to contribute data to help it achieve its goals, but all through a technical interface.
So what is a typical decentralized or hybrid trial that you guys see come through today? I would love to get a sense for what's difficult to make hybrid, what's really straightforward, and what that balance looks like. So walk through a typical patient journey through a trial and an investigator journey, I think would be really useful.
Yeah, of course. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with hybrid, because I think that's probably one of the things to align on early and upfront. Is there was a lot of kind of hype around, there's a lot of hype in the market today around decentralization, and I think confusion as to what that practically means. When we talk about decentralized trials or virtual trials, I think the first thing that a lot of people think about is, okay, everything's going to be through the computer or through my phone or through a digital medium. And that's really not the majority of what we see in the market. For a variety of reasons, it doesn't always make sense to facilitate a 100% decentralized trial. And by that, I mean, if you have a research protocol that has 10 scheduled visits, all 10 are happening in a digital or virtual context. What's much more common is that you're running these hybrid models where you're taking 3 or 5 or 7 visits and you're converting that to a virtual or decentralized interaction. So in terms of the patient journey, a lot of the core pieces of the patient journey remain the same as they would in a kind of more traditional centralized clinical trial. It's just that the location that some of these things are happening is different. So typically there is there's a recruitment process and education process where someone with a specific disease state learns about a research study. And we'll talk about that, I think, a lot as we go through the rest of the session. So I won't spend too much time there, but at some point there is this interaction that drives a decision to say, hey, yes, I want to enroll in this study. There's typically a screening process and a consenting process. So one of the things that often happens in a decentralized or hybrid decentralized format is electronic consent instead of a patient having to come into a site and sign a paper consent form. And then there are going to be some interactions between the patient and the site staff to confirm eligibility and then ultimately to enroll in the study. And that enrollment decision may drive then a series of, it could be a wide range of activities, whether it's the distribution of drug, whether it's the randomization to a blinded cohort. In a more observational context, it may just be initiation of a study and be the first of maybe a sequence of visits that, that happen throughout. So the patient journey from that point on is really dictated by the research protocol. And so one of the simple ways to think about it is that the protocol will describe a series of visits. And what then becomes different about a centralized versus a decentralized trial is that your location or the patient location for those visits is going to change. And the way that we make those decisions is we look at the assessments that need to be conducted on each visit, the data that needs to be captured, and we determine whether those data can be captured in a decentralized context. And that may take a variety of forms. It may be a conversation with a physician, just like you and I are having right now, Patrick, where there's a coached assessment or there's a validated clinical outcomes assessment that exists within the platform, and the physician-patient interaction can document those data in a validated manner. It may involve a home healthcare provider coming to the home and being a part of kind of essentially a 3-way engagement where the provider is interacting with the patient at the direction of the research physician. Or it may just be a patient and caregiver interacting with a series of assessments themselves. So on their device, answering a series of questions or linking a wearable that they may have been provided. So,
and what in your experience is typically driving the pharma company or biotech company who's sponsoring the trial to start to look at a hybrid or decentralized approach? What are the top 2 or 3 biggest drivers that make them say, I want to actually look at this really seriously rather than go with the typical fully centralized approach?
For sure. I think the first one is that a decentralized model is much more accessible for a wider range of patients and sites. If you think about kind of the traditional centralized model, it really relies on a patient having a relationship with a physician who is a part of that study. And as research participation tends to be centralized, or well, I guess I shouldn't use that term, but localized to a number of kind of repeat sites or repeat physicians, what that can really mean is that there's a limitation, particularly geographically, around where you're pulling patients into the study from. So what using technology really does is it levels the playing field in a lot of ways and makes research more accessible both for patients and for physicians who may not have kind of the full physical equipment that they may need to run a full research site. So that's kind of the first thing is kind of inclusiveness and access to research. I think the second thing is a combination of volume of data and then the efficiency with which those data can be collected and essentially cleaned. So in any research study, the success is you have a high quality data output that then you can take to analysis, and that can be a part of a regulatory filing or some other kind of objective. And those data are all determined by the protocol, but because in a traditional context, you tend to have a limitation around the amount of data that can be captured because you're relying on someone having an interaction with a patient and entering data into a data capture platform. With decentralized models, when you're linking things like wearables, when you are able to push PROs to patients and their caregivers on an ongoing basis, you have the ability to really increase the volume of data. And so your comprehensive understanding of the patient experience grows. And then on the efficiency side, in core to the concept of decentralized trials is that you're relying, at least on the patient side, more on e-source. So you're collecting data at source, which means that data doesn't really need to be cleaned, which is a very expensive and labor-intensive part of a traditional clinical trial process.
And if you take it to its extreme, what are the aspects of this that can be completely without a site investigator in the loop, and on the other extreme, what are the things that you all have, try as you might, not been able to make decentralized? I'm thinking things like MRIs, or what's the last frontier of things that you really can't decentralize, and what are the things that have been a slam dunk, so to speak?
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the things that's important to us is we always want sites and physicians to be a part of the studies, where there are definitely some out there who are trying to replace the full model. We don't really see a future in which they're out of the equation. It's just more of how are you enabling them with technology to be more efficient. In terms of what can be conducted outside of the clinic versus what can't, I think you've hit some of the big ones already in terms of some of those larger functional tests, MRIs, et cetera, that is really not pragmatic to take outside of the clinic. Many trials include they may include things like surgeries, and so obviously those types of medical interventions cannot be performed outside of a clinic. One of the areas where we see the greatest opportunity for more decentralization is the adoption of home health care practices, where you have trained physicians who are actually able to conduct assessments in the home. So things like limited physical assessments, blood draws, certain drug administrations. I think that's where we see a lot of opportunity independent of the technology, is actually facilitating that interaction between a home healthcare provider and a physician in the home. So it's still convenient for the participant. It still bears a lot of the benefit of DCT, but you're able to get a more versatile range of data endpoints you're able to capture. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned the increasing access, both on the site side, where sites that may not have all the expensive equipment can still take part, and also on the patient side. And I'm sure you all have some stats on this, but could you share a little bit what what a hybrid or decentralized model looks like compared to the typical model. In particular, I'm interested from the patient's perspective, that what are patients who live 200 miles outside of a major metro area that would just be excluded from all other studies? What does it look like when you enable one of these models? Do they still have to make like one trip into the big metro area at some point, or how does that actually work?
Yeah, it'll depend a lot on the assessments that you're trying to capture within the study. I think it also is going to depend pretty highly on kind of the motivation of the patient. Are they in a high, really high mortality disease state where they are going to be, very motivated to go into the clinic, for a number of different visits, even if they are 200 miles away, even if they have to get on a plane? Or are you dealing with a disease state that is, kind of more chronic, and certainly there's a desire to be past it or to have it moderated, but it's not as critical and essential. And then alongside that, what are the assessments that need to be captured through the research protocol, and how likely are you to be able to capture those outside of the clinic? I mean, oncology is a great example of if you're relying on MRIs to take RECIST assessment, or to do your RECIST assessments throughout the study, well, you're probably going to have to facilitate getting the patient to the clinic. And there are lots of ways to do that. Even just beyond having a patient get in their car and drive 200 miles, you can facilitate a simpler interaction. You may be able to use things like local imaging centers that are working on behalf of the PI. And then the PI is kind of adjudicating the overall the data that's collected. So there are some in-between models that can be adopted. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious if you can do a little bit of this is not going to be falsifiable because you won't be able to rerun time, but I'm curious what impact. I know COVID had an enormous acceleration in terms of companies adopting hybrid decentralized models, in large part out of necessity, but the trend was there already to begin with. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what changed over the last 2 years, what you think is going to stick, what was going to happen anyways, and maybe anything that maybe wasn't going to happen, but COVID has caused a change that maybe was going to take 10 years or more previously.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think at least in our sector of the industry, I mean, what a incredible forcing mechanism for the adoption of technology at scale. I think there are a few things that I would just kind of share as data points and as indicators. The first thing is from our customer perspective. I think we've seen this change in the conversation pre to post, where customers were asking us things like, how do you run decentralized trials? And they were being run out of their innovation groups, and they were kind of being run as these pilot projects. And the question now is not how, but how do we scale? How do we run 50% of our trial portfolio decentralized? And so I think that, from the pharma biotech perspective, we are past that point where decentralized models for clinical trial delivery, particularly that hybrid model, those are going to be the new normal for clinical research. And we like to say that decentralized trials will just become trials, because that's just the way that research will be run. One of the other things that we've seen is some of these therapeutic areas that were kind of held at arm's length from decentralized models. We've talked a little bit about oncology today, where the sentiment was, well, decentralization can't work in these areas. The pandemic has really forced the discussion of, okay, maybe it's not going to work in a fully decentralized format, but we have to figure out how to facilitate interactions between my highly immunocompromised cancer patients and their physicians in this situation where if you're a cancer patient, you don't want to go to a hospital. And so that's forced the industry, I think, to get a lot more creative, to the point at which we see oncology studies as a really high percentage of our portfolio. And I think this is true kind of across some of these stickier, harder to reach therapeutic areas, CNS, psychiatry, et cetera. One of the other things that I think is just broader and maybe a little bit more philosophical in nature, but But what we've seen is kind of social transformation in terms of how consumers receive healthcare. And one of my core hypotheses for the market going forward is that for a consumer base that is now starting to receive their healthcare more through digital means, there is going to be an expectation that that now flows through to research. There wasn't a huge amount of dissonance pre-COVID between the research experience and just the standard consumer experience, right? Like you go to a waiting room, you wait there for 45 minutes, you see your physician, they enter a bunch of data, and then you drive back home. But now you're in this situation where so many people are receiving care through telehealth. There's no waiting room, everything is on demand. And you're going to start to see some real dissonance in the research experience if clinical research doesn't look more like that. I think you're going to have a really hard time recruiting patients in particularly certain instances. I think maybe the last thing, Patrick, in terms of kind of how COVID has changed things, is we've gotten the opportunity to really prove out the model. So kind of going back to the first point made around decentralized trials used to kind of be 1, 2, 3, 5 studies in a given pharmaceutical company's portfolio. Now you've got such a critical mass of studies that are being run in a decentralized manner. You're starting to actually get the data to demonstrate, does it actually work? And one of the things that we did to kind of contribute to this broader body of knowledge is we worked with one of our partners in the analytics space that aggregate a lot of operational performance data across clinical trials. And we did kind of a pre-COVID, post-COVID analysis of threads data and in this kind of industry standard benchmark data set. And we looked at 2 dynamics, recruitment and discontinuation in research. And one of the really interesting things that we saw is that in early 2020, when the lockdowns were going into effect, both data sets saw this kind of precipitous drop in recruitment, spike in discontinuation, as many were obviously very concerned about what the future would look like. But what we saw was that in the decentralized clinical trial data set, which was actually a mix of hybrid and fully DCT, there was this reversion to the normal within 3 or 4 months. So recruitment rates stabilized and even improved, discontinuation rates stabilized and even improved. Whereas in the industry data set, you saw this kind of unbounded, attrition, especially of patients. And what that means is that for traditional trials, they're running longer, taking longer to recruit, and they're keeping less of their participants. And so that's really important for research because it means that more research is failing. So it was an opportunity for us to kind of prove out the model. And so I think this combination of, well, industry is changing, the consumer is changing, and this technology-enabled approach, it actually is working, means that I really do think that hybrid DCT is the future for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, the point that you made as well about cancer trials, who previously were saying basically there's no way we could do this, but then had to find a way. I think it's a really interesting example of something that could have taken who knows how long, 10, 20 years to discover otherwise, had this global pandemic not happen. I'm curious whether you learned anything from, I'm not sure if you all were involved in any of the COVID vaccine trials, but in particular the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech were through in, they got through in record time in clinical trials world. And obviously in the real world, it was just about a year. What did you learn from watching that or being part of that unfold about how we might do trials much more quickly and effectively in the future when there's not a global pandemic that's forcing us to?
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's kind of one piece of that, which is how are you actually running the studies? How are you getting the amount of data? How are you getting the number of patients you need, the amount of data that you need on those patients to sufficiently power an analysis? And so we've kind of talked about that already in terms of these were being run in decentralized formats. And so we've talked about kind of some of the efficiency levers that you're able to pull because of the technology. I think the other piece is the regulatory framework, which is there was this big forcing mechanism to get something through really quickly, but also to maintain high scientific rigor and to make sure that obviously the evidence captured was all right and good, especially given the broad consumption across the population. And that was more of a regulatory driver, right? So the regulators said that they would kind of open up new and novel pathways to bring these vaccines to market more quickly. And it's not entirely unprecedented. We see some of these kind of more novel pathways in the oncology space, in the rare disease space, especially when you don't have therapies on market that are commercially accessible. So there are things like breakthrough designations and statuses like that that allow you to take more innovative approaches to research, adaptive trial models, kind of bringing together your phase 2, phase 3, potentially submitting earlier off of phase 2 data. But I think the restrictions have always been around, is there this high and unmet need? So I think it remains to be seen whether and how the agencies continue to evolve their models over time. It was certainly exciting to see how quickly we could develop something, and certainly a high scientific achievement for this community. And I think probably lots of lessons to learn on the regulatory side in terms of how can we do more of this, even when the need is not so high and unmet, but we still want to bring things to market faster.
Are you all doing a lot of work in rare diseases? You mentioned breakthrough designation and other kinds of approaches. It would seem that the DCT model really fits the population well, because it's I know from our work is how challenging it is to find enough people, sometimes even within an entire country, let alone an entire metro area. How much of your work is in rare disease versus common diseases that are maybe possible to recruit through a traditional method, but just challenging because it asks so much of patients?
We do see a pretty high percentage of our kind of ongoing study base is rare, and for all of the reasons that you mentioned. I think just the experience, particularly of patients with rare diseases, often you can be dealing with significant mobility challenges. You're often dealing with pediatric indications that require a caregiver or multiple caregivers to be participants in addition to the actual patient who's has that disease state. And so there are a lot of reasons for kind of rapid adoption in the rare disease space. So yeah, we see very, very high adoption. And for all the reasons that you also mentioned in terms of breaking down geographic barriers, because these indications are rare, every patient is so valuable as a participant in that research study, because it's not like you can go find 10 others to help you achieve your trial endpoint. You really have to do anything and everything to make it work. And I think that's where, kind of similar to the oncology COVID example that we talked about, there has been this forcing mechanism of, it's not actually really optional whether we get this patient or not. We have to do whatever it takes to bring this patient into the study. And so let's design the research study around that patient so that we can make it as easy as possible for them to join.
Yeah, how much, I was going to ask this earlier, but this is a perfect segue into that. How much do you all get to help the sponsors to tweak their protocol? Because one of the things that I see all the time is there's sometimes a tension between running the perfect experiment, from a sense that we really want to collect all the data that we need, prove that this works, or test that it works in the most effective way possible, versus some of the operational realities of we can't take an MRI every 2 weeks, or we can't take a spinal tap every 2 weeks. Just no one would sign up for it. It's expensive. It's impossible. How much do you all get to come in and actually bring your expertise to say, this is a good start. However, to make it work, we tweak it and do you run into challenges with fitting those operational requirements alongside the scientific ones, and how do you work through those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the more exciting transformations that's happened for our business over the course of the last couple of years. I think when obviously we are a tech company at our core, but what that tends to mean in clinical research for many companies in the tech space is, here's the research protocol. Now, make your technology work so that we can
make it happen.
Study, right? So, but as we've started to see this change in our customer base, and they've started to look at adoption at scale, one of the things we've found is that they're looking to us as much more of a solutionist and a strategic provider of solutions, not just technology, to help them with the scale. So we've been working with customers for a long time on the design of their protocols. And over the course of the last year, we've actually kind of formalized a consulting group around the design of DCTs. So we work typically with our customers in we've got a protocol synopsis, at least in draft or potentially formalized. And our consulting teams will go in and really, in a highly focused manner, look at the schedule of assessments, look at the objectives of the study and what can be collected in a decentralized manner versus what needs to remain on site. So we are starting to be in those positions pretty consistently of protocol design, and it's been really exciting for us.
Yeah, it makes total sense, because the more of these you run, the more you'll be able to learn what works and what doesn't work in the real world, right? And whatever you can fix upstream at the protocol level before things enter the real world, the better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's where all the discussions around trade-offs can be had, because I think once things just move from the medical teams who are writing the protocols into the operational teams, you start to have less flexibility, right? Because you can't have that trade-off discussion of, well, if we change this endpoint slightly, or if we got this data through a different assessment, you can actually do this whole visit in a decentralized or virtual capacity versus, you're bringing all your patients to the site for that visit. So when you lose that, when protocols make that shift from the medical teams to the ops teams, it tends to be harder to kind of break that apart and influence change.
Yeah, 100%. What are you seeing? You talked about a few market trends earlier that you were seeing. What are you seeing on the personalized medicine front? Have you seen over the last few years more activity in asking for genetic testing and other types of genetic biomarkers? And do you have any predictions on what that looks? Because in my mind, I see these two trends as really reinforcing one another. As medicines become more personalized, there's even more of a need for expanding the access pool for patients and sites in order to hit the enrollment numbers required to do good clinical trials. So I'm curious of your view on it, because I'm really coming from the personalized medicine side rather than the DCT side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are kind of two parallel trends in industry. To the point of some of the graphics that you were showing, a lot of this has been done in the cancer space for quite a while. And again, similar to what we've talked about, there tends to have to be a forcing mechanism to adopt and to innovate. In the cancer space, there's been this high unmet need that's allowed a lot of these concepts to really prove out. And I think, to your point, we are going to see this personalization, this specialization of clinical therapies. And I think we only get more personalized from here across a broad therapeutic base, where I don't think we go back. So I do think that's definitely the future. And that, from a recruitment perspective, the challenge is just magnified. So you go from kind of recruiting that needle in a haystack to trying to find like that specific grain of sand on a beach, right? So your challenge becomes so much more difficult. And then also to, once you personalize in an indication, to some extent, every indication becomes a rare indication, right? Because you're looking for a specific genomic subtype, and maybe that some are more prevalent than others, but you're essentially taking that rare disease trial concept and you're applying it to everything because you're looking for a very specific type of patient. So then all of what we've just said kind of in the past few minutes becomes very important, where you have to get that patient. You can't go and get the 5 other patients to replace them. So
yeah, that's exactly how I see it. Every common disease is going to be increasingly reclassified into rarer subtypes. And, to your point, everything ultimately becomes a rare disease paradigm versus a common disease paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how about representativeness and inclusiveness in trials, because this layers a further challenge, but obviously in my opinion one that's warranted, is are you seeing customers come to you and proactively saying we want to make sure that our trials are inclusive and representative, and also do you imagine that there's going to be another forcing function from the FDA or other groups at some point to mandate that trials require some degree of representativeness? Because this is one of those things that has been pervasive in genomics for a very long time of most data sets are very Eurocentric, and there's downstream effects on this. I'm curious whether any of your customers are thinking about getting ahead of this and making sure they're doing it right from the outset, or how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And I mean, I think what we see today on in much marketing in the space is that there's this heavy focus on kind of diversity and inclusion. I'm glad you brought up representativeness, because that is the scientific complement to the social demand, right? So it is actually very important scientifically for you to have a representative population of your real world population. You want your evidence to show what your drug is going to do in a real world setting, and that matters from many demographic angles. And so I think I've been glad to see this as kind of a push in industry. I would say what Thread sees is companies wanting to use decentralized technologies as a means to gaining better representativeness. It's not that our customers will come to us and they'll say, hey, can you make my trial more inclusive, or can you increase my representativeness, or can you drive diversity in this way, whether it be age or race or whatever demographic it is. It's more of they see the opportunity of decentralization as driving that, and it's an output specification. So I think, again, making research more accessible to people who live further away from the research centers, helping people who don't have a relationship with research physicians understand that there is a research opportunity for them, using technology and modes of engagement that are familiar and that feel more like my regular day-to-day. These are all breaking down barriers that stop people from engaging in research. But I would say, honestly, like, we need to do a lot more data is needed really to understand exactly how much it moves the needle. And I think, that's kind of the next wave of analyses that we'd like to be running.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. There's a great follow-up question to this that came through the chat. Question for Joss: what are the most important methods for recruiting patients to decentralized trials? Because they'll be very different
Sure.
from centralized ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that, again, if we see the market as mostly hybrid decentralized, you're going to have a healthy mix of both approaches. At Thread, we really see ourselves as augmenting or complementing the researcher site-driven recruitment models. In a traditional context, sites are really focusing typically on local engagement means. So they're combing through their site databases. They're doing local ad campaigns and print media and all these things. And really, what Thread is trying to do is to augment those modes of patient engagement with broader digital strategies that can be thought of more at a national level or at targeted areas nationally, depending on where you actually need to drive participants to participate in a study. A few different models that I think are important for research broadly, but especially for decentralized trials is, what does your social engagement look like? I think that's an important area for certain demographics. As you have consumers of healthcare who really start to trust and value the influencers that they see on social media, I think those remain important channels. Although with all that we see and kind of the questioning of the social media model, I do think you need mixed approaches. But social is a big channel that we do explore. We work with a number of real world data companies to do more kind of targeted, precise, location-specific recruitment, and that's a pretty common model in industry, at least at this stage. Other models really include a lot of what you're doing, Patrick, where you're kind of instead of saying where is the needle in the haystack and trying to make the haystack as small as possible, you try to find as many of those needles as you can find and then direct them to the applicable research. And it's a totally different model. It's kind of the difference between going from, a de-identified set to an identified data set, and you're pushing those patients to then make a recruitment decision because they know that they are highly eligible for research. So I would say all of those models are really important. And what we find is that typically we're not just promoting or bringing one model to a research study. We're trying to layer multiple so that we can, really recruit the study as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And every population needs something a little different, right? We for some of the studies that we work on, we make phone, no digital interaction at all required. You just need to pick up the phone and call is a route, whereas others, digital is the primary route. This may be a good segue into another question that's just come through the chat, which is on the point of inclusiveness and representativeness. Is there a worry that embracing technology may leave segment of patients behind when implementing hybrid or DCTs? So people from underprivileged backgrounds who may not have access to technology, or those who are less digitally literate, so to speak, and not able to as easily access these devices. How do you all think about those and approach that question?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think I would say kind of a few different things. The first is there is broad acceptance across the kind of the trial designer base of provisioning devices. So one of the things that we would do is we would provision preloaded lockdown mobile phones, where mobile phones are required if there is ever any kind of gap in terms of not having a compatible device. The second thing that we do is we look to make our bring your own device models as flexible and inclusive as possible. Many technologies out there, they'll only work with like the iPhone 13 or the latest and greatest smartphone and corresponding operating system. One of the things we've really prioritized at Thread is supporting much older generations of operating systems and mobile devices. So to the point at which we actually support iPhone devices with operating systems that Apple doesn't even support, right? Because not everyone is updating their phone even every 5-6 years. So that's kind of one of the ways to make these studies more accessible. And lastly, another approach is to make engagement omni-channel. So instead of relying on a mobile device, well, maybe you can make your research just web-based. So anyone who can access the web at appropriate timeframes can participate in a study, even if they don't have a phone or for whatever reason are not provisioned one. So there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways to do this, and I think ultimately, if we kind of look at where everything comes down, where all the chips fall, the number of people who are able to access and use a phone in a study is going to be a much greater segment of the population than those who can actually go to a research site at a specific location, 10 times over 2 years.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love to hear more actually about the extent of wearable devices that you all work with, because I know people who are as not as involved in the day-to-day. When you say wearable device, they probably think, Fitbit, Whoop type of things, but I know there's a huge array of sophisticated sensors that you all work with. I wonder if you could just give a couple examples of the kind of specialist hardware that you're using on some of these kind of studies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense that those are kind of the first things that are thought about. One of the first big distinctions when you look at sensors and wearables is it a consumer device or is it actually a medical grade device? And the reason that's important is because you have to tie the device to the data or the endpoint you're trying to collect in the research project. So if you're if you're doing just exploratory work, maybe a consumer wearable is fine, but if you're actually trying to tie the data to an endpoint, you need a level of validation that you're only going to get in the medical grade devices. So we do work with a wide range of different devices. My team actually spends a lot of time looking at the sensor and wearable landscape and going out and proactively setting up relationships with those companies and putting data integrations in place so that we can facilitate a really positive user experience. And ideally all through the Thread application, they're managing that device. Some big areas that we work in, spirometry, actigraphy, electrocardiography. These are all kind of areas that we're deploying pretty routinely that are beyond kind of your typical Fitbit or smart scale or something like that. That may be a little bit more common.
What was that second one that you said? Actigraphy.
Actigraphy, yeah. So yeah, it's just that there's a difference in the device and sensor space between activity and actigraphy. And if you push me too far down that road, I probably won't be able to give you technical definitions, but actigraphy devices tend to fall on this medical grade wearable spectrum versus your typical Fitbit, which is just counting your steps. Actigraphy devices often have accelerometers and gyroscopes in them so that you can capture things like falls, and you can do some pretty unique things through them.
Yeah, I mean, the sophistication in the space, especially over the last 5 years, seems to have exploded. I've seen some incredible demos. I did a lot of my research in rare kind of pediatric diseases and some kind of movement disorders. And the difference between what you can gather from a device like that compared to, in muscular dystrophy, there's a 6-minute walk test that's kind of been the gold standard for a long time, but it has a lot of challenges to it. And the level of data you can get from having an amazing device like that that's hooked up to someone's ankle for weeks compared to a 6-minute walk test is just, it's completely binary, the difference, isn't it?
It is, totally. Yeah, 100% agree.
Well, I'm going to give everybody another minute or two if there's any other final burning question. Otherwise, we're going to end here and give everybody 5 minutes if you're still in the middle of your day to take a break in between the Zoom meetings that we're probably all still on. So it looks like no final questions have come through. Just a couple of words. First, Joss, thanks so much for your time. Really, truly appreciate it. I learned a lot through the conversation and appreciate you walking through all of this. It was really a pleasure.